So yeah, this is definitely one of the best security conferences around, I think. Anyway, I hope you agree. Especially in the state of Michigan. And, although I love to have my Converge and, B-sides and everything else and fit those in during the year, and we're on the, Detroit side of town. And, there's some wonderful people in MindStack that I actually linked up with, but I'm D0xt0r. It's a funny name, but at one point I worked with people that have multiple doctorate degrees, and I said I will never get a doctorate degree. So that's where the name comes from. I have a history, and I'll talk about that. But this all started with an idea, and the idea and the concept is that we were going to make an automotive certificate program at Walsh College, and that's where I worked at the time. And they're still going about, and they're still doing it, which is awesome. And it's hands-on, it's offensive, and the way we go about it is that we're including people from different parts of the automotive industry. And me being more like the gray hat that grew up into like operational security type of person, decided that, hey, in these conversations, and as I was talking to people that work for the automotive companies that actually do try to secure their automotive vehicles the best they can, I felt a little bit out of place. I feel a little bit more comfortable in this type of environment with people like myself. So that's where this kind of came from. So we're talking about the cultural crash. And there's a couple of things that I've observed along the way while I was going to some of these different vendors and, the suppliers and automotive people, organizations, and talking to them about possibly linking up and joining the forces to help with the certification. So along those lines, basically, I felt like, there's a little bit there. I felt like...
What my associate is trying to say
Tommy
is
boy.
that our new brake pads are really cool. You're not even going to believe it. Like, let's say you're driving along the road with your family, and you're driving along, la-li-la, woo, and then all of a sudden there's a truck tire in the middle of the road, and you hit the brakes. Whoa, that was close. Now let's see what happens when you're driving with the other guy's brake pads. You're driving along, and all of a sudden the kids are yelling from the back seat, I gotta go to the bathroom, Daddy. Not now, damn it. Truck tire. I can't stop. Help! There's a cliff.
That's when your firmware screws up.
And your family's screaming, oh my God, we're burning alive! No, I can't feel my legs! Here comes a meat wagon! Woo, woo, woo. And the medic gets out and says, oh my God! New guy's in the corner puking his guts out. All because you want to save a couple extra pennies. And to me, it doesn't...
Get out. Now.
Do you validate?
Now.
Okay, thank you.
So I kind of like that, because that's one of the things that, in the security arena, we often get told is, hey, what's it going to cost? Is it actually, going to, is there a trade-off? Should we eliminate this, or should we just accept the risk? Should we just keep on moving forward? It's the decisions that we have to make. But what we have to do here is take it a step back. And basically what we have to do is try our best to define culture. And through this conversation, through this presentation, we're going to talk about stereotypes, the similarities we have between people in corporate culture and people that are traditional hackers, people that actually work in their own workplaces, set up their own different boxes and try to attack those boxes to try to better our own understanding of security. What are some of the countermeasures and the cultural clashes that go with that? And hopefully we're going to look at the case study, because I also believe a lot in history, and we don't want to repeat that. So that's the kind of talk this is. It's not very technical from that standpoint, but so if you're expecting a more technical talk, then you might want to go to something else that's a little bit more technical. But so about me, I have 18 years of experience in operational security, and I worked mainly at a college level, and I was one of the guys that they kind of looked to when they had security breaches and stuff like that and say, okay, well, how did this get out? And I would do a quick Google search, and I'd find like the document that some idiot posted out there exploiting our information, or posting our information to the web. Basically, I spent 6 years teaching cybersecurity. I'm a big fan of Ed Scotus and what he's done at SAMS. I think they're doing it right. It's a bit expensive, so I was trying to build a program that was basically competitive with that. And I'm a past full-time faculty member at Walsh College. So the views that I have in this presentation and things I talk about are obviously my own and not of my employer. So when we talk about culture, we have to realize that in 1952, some sociologists went out and, or anthropologists went out, and they tried to define culture, and then basically 50 years passed, and they had 164 different definitions. So by the 1990s, somebody finally drew a line in the sand and said, well, this is probably one of the best ways that we can define culture, and culture is the consistence of derivatives of experience, more or less, that have been learned. So it's a learning feature, it's part of us, and we learn it through others and that are around us, and it's a team effort. That's what culture is, basically. So it kind of sounds like some of the meetings that I've participated in, though, when you don't have a decision, you just keep on going on and on. The hacker culture, though, I think we can, when I speak about the hacker culture, this is what comes to my mind, that we're noble explorers, we're protector or guardians of the interwebs. There's also divisions within that hacker culture. There's the Black Hat versus the DEF CON. Obviously, DEF CON supporting more of the EFF group, less expensive, or DEF CON, definitely less expensive than the Black Hat culture, where you pay a lot more for viewing the same presentations pretty much the week before. There's the ethical versus the unethical, and where do you draw the line in the sand with that? And there's many shades of gray. There's the hacktivists versus law enforcement, and then there's also the subject, when we talk about that, it's very deep and wide. So due to diversity and experience, the views of this may vary, and we could probably argue about this all day. So when we classify hackers, or at least when I classify hackers, I think of more like the DEF CON, the traditional hackers, people that, like myself. I grew up testing security controls, and I didn't really realize it until I got a formal education. And then I started realizing, like, hey, wait a minute, I was actually, like, pen testing a lot of this stuff, and wow, I didn't really even think about it, from physical locks all the way over to websites and stuff like that. And then I started to realize some of the folly in my ways. The Black Hat actually represents more of the corporations, and there's a few people like Mudge that actually can make the crossover from the DEF CON to the Black Hat and so on and so forth, and consult with the Pentagon. And he kind of represents a lot of us, and he helps out with the hacker community as well. Cultural clashes, basically, these are the ones that I think that we have. We have media versus the hacker versus corporation. We have a huge one, which is basically, should we go ahead and have open source for automotive vehicles versus the closed source argument? One side believes that it's information sharing. The other side believes that we should have hands-on. There's the unbound people, which is more the hackers, versus the corporations that have very strict boundaries of what you can and cannot do, and what you will say and what you won't say, or you won't have a job. So there's the communication response. There's the hacker tools that are out there that are different. Obviously, the corporation has a lot more money to spend on tools, where we develop our own and we post them to various websites to make them available for people that want to play with them. And we have the testing and proofing concepts and legality concerns and ethics. So, cultural crash number one. So, it's the media versus the hacker culture. Basically, this is a screenshot of what people think about hackers in general. We don't all wear hoodies, first and foremost, but this is the stuff that they put out there. You guys all know this. And then there's ads and stuff like that along the way. It says, how hackers and car makers are battling for control of your ride. Well, when the average user reads this, they think that you're trying to break into their car. And that's not necessarily true for the most part. I mean, we're just interested in like trying to figure out, we might want to plug into the CAN bus of the vehicle. It might be our own vehicle, just to see what we can do, what we can make work and what we can't work. We're makers. And from that sense, I mean, that's what we do. So, does the media portray the culture of the hackers like as being bad? Absolutely. But they also portray the corporations as being bad as well, depending on what the flaw is in their vehicles. And you can find different types of, examples for that. So Henry Ford, basically, he's one of our original hackers, and he's from around the, Detroit metropolitan area, so we all know about him if we grew up around there. But he talked about failure as simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. And that's the way we all have to approach it. And from that standpoint, as far as a corporation, it's like, if a hacker finds some kind of flaw in your system, then that's actually a good thing, because now you know it exists, and now you know there might be something that you have to address at that point. Is it something that we have to address? And you do a risk analysis on it, and you kind of move on. So, when you talk about media versus hacker culture, where is the media when we actually look at military, and when we look at the law enforcement agencies and stuff like that, that are out there? They're hackers as well. And I've actually had the pleasure of training people that have been ex-military, that are military, that are actually law enforcement agents along the way in offensive and defensive technologies, as it relates to computer security. And they're pretty cool people, but they think a lot like the hackers, the homegrown hackers that I was at one point, which is pretty cool. So we are the makers, breakers, and builders, and we do have a law enforcement among us as well. And, that gets more along the lines of the Black Hat versus the DEF CON conferences and stuff like that. Obviously, if you're familiar with DEF CON, you know that law enforcement isn't really welcome at DEF CON. But media versus the hacker culture resolution. Stereotyping really doesn't help any of us. So we all don't shut cars down on busy freeways. We might test in our own garages. Craig Smith, I actually got to meet him, have breakfast with him. He's a really nice guy. And in fact, he comes from like the same type of background I come from, as far as, working for education and information technology and doing security work there. Not every corporate person is born stiff. Okay. I met some really cool people that worked with us actually are in the corporations that know a lot. And in fact, some of those people actually helped out over at, B-Sides this year. And they were supporting like the Hacker Challenge, and they came up with all the various different challenges. So they are among us, believe it or not. Now, they might not come out and say, and here's a problem with this too, is that as hackers, we like to find a hole in something, and we kind of like say, WTF, what's up with this, like this hole in this product, and why isn't this fixed? And then we like to point at the organization and say, God, you guys must be stupid. But a lot of times with that said, it comes down to somebody did a risk assessment, or they might have known about it, but they can't speak about it. And we've seen some of that recently as far as... They asked me to dance with you. Okay. All right. So, anyway... So basically, what we have to think about there is now I'm totally distracted. Where was I? But anyway, yeah, that totally distracted. But, thank you. It was a pleasant distraction anyway. But, what we have to think about is like basically pairing ourselves up with the corporate environments and like how to work with them and in a constructive way. So corporations don't all address the 0-day disclosures in a timely manner as we would all like to see. And it's never been a cool thing to the public or the hacking community. And the reason why this is, and it's the same in cars as it is in any server or operating system that's out there, is because we just want to see it fixed. Okay, and the reason why we go ahead and we just go put things out there and to the public and we say, okay, well here's the vulnerability is because it actually lights a fire underneath somebody's bum. And what you have to realize is there are employees that are in a corporate that care about those security concerns. We have, with the example, and that's what I was getting to before I was interrupted, was with Yahoo. Recently, they had a very good security expert in over there, okay? And he finally came out and said, look, we tried to secure this stuff a few years ago before this all happened. We tried to be, in the forefront as far as security in Yahoo, but basically what happened was they decided the cost of spending the money on the countermeasures wasn't worth it. Okay? So he ended up moving on, and he's probably getting paid pretty good for it, and maybe has less stress. But that type of stuff does happen. So anyway. Media versus the hacker culture and the resolution, you could see here is there is one way that I was looking at this, as far as the hacker in me is why don't you just fix the damn thing? Okay? And that's on the outside. But when you look at it from a back view, and as I'm sitting in these meetings and I'm meeting with these people that are very intelligent, just as every bit as intelligent as me, and totally understand and are able to hang with me in my conversations, I was like, wow, these guys are not all idiots. These guys actually do know what they're talking about. They're actually in our community. They're doing a lot of the cool stuff that we're doing. And we have to realize that perception is something that we all make up. And this is psychological. And it's at that point, and I always like to think of it like this. It's just like a culture, but it's made up in your mind. It's something that you've learned ever since you were a baby and you were born, and you carried it right through. And my perception had to change at that point. And that was a paradigm shifting thing. And going to a lot of conferences, I've heard a lot of hackers kind of bash, the corporations and stuff like that for not fixing things right away. But there is a resolution for that. So, dispel the myth of terms of contribution. So there's teamwork. What I want to think about is how can we go ahead and contribute more to the actual corporate environments. And the one thing is the corporate environments are now welcoming us in. And at the time when I came up with this conversation, they weren't as much so welcoming us in to go ahead and hack their stuff and try to welcome us forward into vulnerability management programs. So obviously, GM was the first to start. They came out with a vulnerability disclosure program, but that was a big step. When I seen that, I'm like, wow, things are actually changing, maybe for the better. Okay, their disclaimer sucked a little bit, but a lot, but anyway, they want to put, and the reason why I say that is because they want to put constraints around the hackers. Remember, we're unbound. We don't like boundaries. So when you try to put a constraint around us, corporate, then basically what happens is you really turn us off. We don't want to be held liable for something that we want to disclose to you to try to fix your product because you probably should have thought about it in the first place. What we want to do is basically go ahead and, help you out and just get it fixed. That's the mentality. And there's a certain pride, and it depends on the person. It depends on the motivation. It might actually be hey, look, I did this. It was me that actually found this problem, and they fixed it. I think that's where the pride really is with the hacker community. And I think that's where it's got to stay. So we can definitely go ahead and build bridges in terms of that. But I also understand the legality side of the corporation, that they don't want to be held liable for something that might actually cause death or harm. God knows they already have teams of lawyers that they go ahead and employ full time. So realize when somebody talks to media, corporate or versus hackers, sometimes the message gets edited too. So I actually did. I did Channel 50. There was a Street Beat this year. I talked about hackers in general. I talked about some of the security concerns we have, and that's a different topic as far as the nation state and what we have to be more aware of. But in those conversations, you have to realize that sometimes when you say stuff on TV and media, and for those of us that have actually been media trained, sometimes they might get edited or cut down, and then all of a sudden it doesn't sound right. So you have to realize that, and that happens to corporate too. So this plays a lot into the perception of overall public as well. So media is kind of like one of those things. It's like I don't necessarily believe it every time I see it. So, and that's the point of that slide. But, that's what I'm saying is like, you're better to take it back to the person and actually talk to them and try to find out what they said and try to get clarification if you don't agree with it. That's one great thing about this conference is like everybody here like wants to help everybody else out. But, you can always go up to somebody and talk to them. Like I have conversations about building, my classes and stuff like that. And I'll go out and I'll reach out to Chris Roberts and stuff like that. I mean, this is the best thing. And that's why I love this community. I love this setting as far as that is concerned. If you want to talk about building an educational program, then come talk to me. I have like 18 years experience in it. But, open source. So in order to contribute to open source, both parties need to have trust with each other, the hackers and the corporation. Obviously, the trust isn't there when you actually have some kind of sign-off. You're signing your life away, just in case something happens. And the GM's bug bounty program, like I talked about, was a step in the right place. And Charlie Miller was like the first voice out there, and hopefully we all know who he is, but he's one of the guys that hacked the Jeep and made it like stop, go off the road. Chris Vlasic is the other one. And basically, with that said, he blasted GM right when it first came out because he read the terms of agreement. And then he actually talked to General Motors guy, as it said here, so you have to follow up with something like that and realize that, he's actually like the person on the inside is actually a really pretty cool person. Like when he sat down and he talked to him, it's because he's not that much different than Charlie. Okay. They seen eye to eye. And this is case in point. Okay, so they're human, they have families to feed, and again, with the people I know, they actually are afraid, they have to make sure, I don't want to say afraid, but they want to make sure that they don't say something that's going to get them in trouble and cause problems. So hackers and open source. We tend to be more willing to share, especially in this community. It's like, hey, I wrote some code, do you want to check it out and see if it works and maybe have any input? I know I sat down, like when I was making this presentation, I talked to a couple of people. I said, what do you think about it? How can I improve on it? I actually did that again last night. It's all about sharpening the saw. That's how we all learn. And, the exceptions of when money is the motivation factor. So O-days, basically, the unethicals or maybe even the ethicals might have a good O-day that they don't want to publish to everybody because they know they could possibly make a lot of money on it. So they might hold back on it. So this depends on their ethical alignment, their financial situation. Obviously, if you're not making bank and you find an O-day, it might be like, wait a minute, I kind of gotta feed my kids. There might actually be some ethical choices you have to make there. Hopefully you make the right ones. But with DEF CON, for example, it has parties where people are all up all night sharing, working together, hacking, and helping to facilitate each other's education. And that's the greatest strength of this community. That's what I love about it the most. And that's why I teach security, because it's fun. I mean, I just went and I seen Nick Jacobs talk, and basically what was cool is is there anybody in that 5 Nights at Freddy talk that was there? Okay, Nick Jacobs is actually one of my former students, which is kind of cool. So I'm proud to say that because I see a couple of them here. And actually, I'm hooked up and I'm hanging out with another one all conference, which is cool. So it's fun. When you have a passion, you can share it. And I think we all have a passion we could share. And that's why I'm up here. So open source is a theme for the most part. B-sides, cons, etc. They're clear examples of that. With the, cultural clash, though, it's like there is an exception on this. Obviously, there's a couple of manufacturers out there, Local Motors, WikiSpeed, and some others. They actually believe in open source. They publish their different products that are out there, so people can review it and actually look at it and say whether this is a good build or it's not a good build for their cars. If there's any kind of vulnerabilities in it. What should we do with that? But, as far as like GM, Ford, and some of the other ones, they tend to be more tight-lipped about what they're working on. And that's more apparent, like, when I went to similar facilities, it's like, I taught a lot about physical securities. When you go into has anybody ever gone into a corporation like Ford, GM, or any of the big three automotives around here? Yeah, when you go in there, it's like you go in through your first man trap, you're like, wow, they're really, really serious. And by the way, I tried to like talk to people and see if I could kind of socially just let them no. That wasn't going to happen. They knew that they could lose their job. So it was very serious. But I was thinking like, well, maybe if I was nice to this guy, he would let me in so I wouldn't have to wait here like 15, 20 minutes for somebody to come get me. And it didn't happen. So they are very, very security conscious. So there's codes for CAN bus that are not published. It requires using techniques like fuzzing, but the GPAC shows that fuzzing works, and that's how Charlie Miller and Chris Vlasic actually got their data. So hiding the codes only slow down the attacks, but it doesn't really stop it overall. And, I think maybe that's a strategy that the corporation likes to have, and maybe that's why they're not so big on open source. But, attacks are going to happen, and people are going to find their way around systems. This goes back to a conversation, too. Realize that before I even accepted a job as a cybersecurity full-time instructor at Walsh College, which I'm not there anymore, that basically, and that was by my own choice, but basically I was sitting down at a bar, and I was sitting across from somebody, and that person later on was going to be my contact. So, the cool thing about it was my hacker side of me actually was more social, and I was able to make a contact within an automotive company that was able to land us a meeting, which was pretty cool. So that's something to definitely have going for us. But the overall conversation, and the reason why I bring this up is it's very much about open source and closed source. Is he told me that he was basically working for a major automotive company, and this is like, he's been through a couple of different automotive companies, and what happened was he got placed over at this one he's working at now, and he said that, I said, he didn't know my background, which is funny. And I said, well, what do you do? And, that kind of conversation comes up. And he's like, well, this is what I do. I work on firmware for automotive. I said, what do you think about vehicle hacking? Oh, that one, people don't know enough. There's no way a hacker is going to be able to do anything with it. And like 3 months later, so that's a corporate mentality. 3 months later, Charlie Miller was up on Wired magazine. They had a video that they showed that just proved everything that we just said was wrong. So there is that facet still in the corporate culture that, hey, we don't provide them the codes, they won't know, and all this other stuff, but we figure it out. Because that's what we do. We don't mind spending hours and hours. And by the way, there's tons of hours that Charlie, Chris, props to them, had to go through just to make that work. And that takes a lot of skill and dedication, obviously. Disclosures. We talk about, the hacker mentality. Who wants to go out there and just just make a disclosure public, like right away? And basically, Benjamin Kahns disclosed on July 7th 2 vulnerabilities that were in the BMW connected drive vehicle. Okay, but let's go take a look back. In February, he actually went and he contacted the BMW corporation, and he said that, hey, these vulnerabilities are in there, and the client side cross-scripting vulnerability is also on your website, and they didn't do anything about it. So he sat on it for months, and nothing ever happened from that. So, and we're going to talk about how to fix that, hopefully, if there's not any corporate people that walked out already. But all technology, blueprints, and patents should be available. It sounds like a fantasy, but there are companies that are actually doing that. It's just not the major players in Detroit. So OS Vehicle has a $10,000 car concept. There's Tesla, obviously, opened up patents. More experiment and creativity is going on, and people are learning how to work with the technologies that are in these systems and actually how to break and fix them. More innovations from third parties, that's what it means. There's a good thing that there are smaller alliances that are out there, and actually major automotive players are part of those alliances. So, And we're talking about Ford and GM and stuff like that. So there is an alliance out there, such as the Open Automotive Alliance for Android, where the major manufacturers are out there. So to shift your paradigm a little bit, it's not like it's totally closed like we think it is. So they are sharing a little bit. And that's another reason why I want to get up and have this talk, because, again, dealing with these people, I found these things out. And for my own research, just Googling and checking it out. However, being completely open to the public of the world will attract top talent, as pointed out by the head of Tesla. And you know what? The other thing is, maybe you'll find somebody that's like really geeky and like a hacker and like wants to learn this stuff. And when you see these jobs right now, there's a ton of jobs posted out there for automotive security, but they want you to know CAN bus. They want you to know all these different things. And how do you break into that field? Well, the more you mess with this stuff, the better you're going to get. So, hacker tools versus legality. Well, Charlie Miller, he goes up there, he talks about, there's a lot of people out there writing their own programs on like how to read CAN bus. Why would I ever need to use any of those programs when I have Vehicle Spies, and Vehicle Spy is like one of those tools that are out there that's available to people that make big money, or work for big corporations. So what I found was in conversations and this isn't just like Charlie Miller saying this like on Twitter. That's not where I get this information. It's real world in the meeting rooms. We're talking about we use Canoe for CAN bus sniffing. And we were talking about that, and then all of a sudden, one of the people from the corporation was like, well, or actually, they use Canoe. And then I said, well, we use Kayak, which is kind of a play on words, because Canoe is actually the bigger, more paid for, has more feature rich in there. It's like $3,000 or something for the program, where Kayak is free. So if you can imagine the difference in those two. But there's a big difference between what we use, hackers, and what the people use in the corporations, which is also something that could have a limitation. If you're looking for employment and they want to actually have you have experience just with this one thing. But you could say, hey, I play with Kayak, and maybe, that would give them enough to say, oh, I know what Kayak is. They know these tools. They know the free and open source tools too. So, like I said, they're not stupid. The Vehicle Spy, that's something that Charlie Miller prefers. Sharing information. Automotive tends to be a little bit more responsible than shutting down a vehicle on the freeway. Obviously, they do it in closed environments so that they don't hurt anyone. This creates a struggle both legally on capital. That's the other thing, is like, I've got friends in low and high places, and some of those people actually had to go before Capitol Hill and defend what Charlie Miller did, because it was perceived as irresponsible, which who can fault them, because somebody could have got hurt. And so there's that legal struggle on Capitol Hill that goes both ways. They want to take our rights away for testing on vehicles and testing on different technologies. Well, where do you think they get these ideas from when they see stuff like this? So there's that lone gun mentality out there, but also, if it wasn't done, who would ever take it as a big perceivable threat? So there's that other side of the coin. And it's like, and to me, it almost seems like what's happening, and this is my humble opinion, is that we're getting pushed into the corner of making these horrible decisions, because nobody's going to listen to us unless we actually do that. So, more solutions. To demand respect, you must gain respect. And in the corporate culture, that's definitely more true than not. So it pays to be professional, when you're dealing with these people. I didn't have the Tommy Boy meeting because I understood that. Okay. That's what was going on in my head. Was the crashing and stuff like that, and the burn. Your car's going to do this and that unless, you actually get our help. But rants are good, but solutions are better. I think we started off a few years ago. We used to rant about security. Now we're all talking about solutions. So we have to have clear lines of communication. And when I talk about this, corporate has to have clear lines of communication with the hacker culture. The hacker culture also needs and wants that communication. Remember, we talked about the BMW vulnerability. It's my humble opinion that if they were communicated to, think about this. If you're a corporation and somebody comes forward with a vulnerability to you and says, hey, you have a problem in your system, then they become your client in a way. You should manage that connection. This person actually cares about your product, then you should probably let them know where it lands at. Are you going to do something about it? Are you planning on it? Maybe you're not going to be able to move as fast enough for whatever limitations or resources you have at that point. But you don't have to tell them all the details, but at least communicate to the hacker community to let them know that it's on your radar. Yeah, you know that thing that you wrote to me about a month ago? We're still looking at it. But if you manage those communications better, you'd probably have less doxing of information out there. Okay? Because all we want to know is like, hey, are we going to make the difference? Are you going to make the difference? Because if you're not, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to release this information to the web. And somebody's going to have to do something about it. And it's going to be you. And oh well. Bug bounties, you have to give closure to those people that reported them. If you are cyber ninja, well, cyber ninjas are mostly the hackers communities, and it's most of the people in this room. So, and that's definitely me. It's somebody that can do a lot with just a little bit. If you actually have people working for you, there was a good talk about a year or two ago, and basically it was talking about how the care and feeding cyber ninjas. That was Atlas of Doom that talked about it, and that's so true. It's like, you don't want to piss us off because we're just going to walk away. Because we know we're employable and we're going to find something somewhere else. And, but for the most part, we're also dedicated. I worked for a place for 18 years. So what's that say about me? I don't just walk away from things. I like a relationship. I like a family, if it's a corporate family, then great. But, corporations need to recognize and give those that find 0 days by fixing those issues and giving the hacker props. That's the other thing is like, they want to know that they want to be able to say, look what I did. I found something and it got fixed. I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to. Most importantly, realize that we have a common goal, and that's hopefully to create a safer technology, a safer future for everybody. And I think that really is our common goal. So we need to break down barriers. We need to learn from each other, and we need to listen without prejudice. We need to speak with commonality. Nobody really is better than anyone else as far as the corporations versus the hacker culture. We're all in this together. We're all in this to fix things. The human mind is a wonderful thing. It will help us to actually get through this very easily. The barriers and stereotypes won't move us ahead. They're only going to stop us and slow us down. Conferences are okay, but action is much better at the end of the day. So there's a concept of internal hackers that I kind of came up with a while ago, and it's kind of the cyber ninja versus entrepreneur versus entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is people, and this is an older term from when I was going for my MBA a long time ago, but it behaves like an entrepreneur, but inside the company, you're actually taking it and you're making your own business. You're taking a lot of pride in your work. And I think a lot of us cyber ninjas do that. We take a lot of pride in what we do, and we want to carry that forward. So, if it sounds familiar, it is because it is familiar. So, here's a little quick quiz. Anybody know who these guys are? Who's the guy on the left, and who's the two guys on the right? Does anybody know? So this is like the last part of my talk here. Whoops. I probably already just said it. It just went forward. So it's Roger Boygely, physical engineer, which is on your left, and Charlie Miller and Chris Velastic, which is on your right. So I got my directions messed up here. But what do they have in common? Basically, Roger came out with a vulnerability that was in a vehicle. So did Chris and Charlie Miller. And the perception of Roger was much like Chris and Charlie at the same time. They have messages to deliver, but the action was either slow or too slow or in denial. So keep in mind, Charlie and Chris, again, they did not go out to Chrysler and say, Chrysler, we're just going to go ahead and release this. No, they gave Chrysler some time. They didn't get the response that they thought they should have had, and then they released it. Okay. The perception was pretty bad. Corporate culture does play a big role in this. And it's hard to recommend for corporate culture because it's so large to change. But people focuses on differences more than not, and those differences often hold us back. And why is this important? Because Roger wrote a memo in January 1985 concerning a faulty design in a vehicle. I'm sorry for my presentation. I keep on skipping forward. But anyway, the rocket boosters was a problem in the Challenger. And on January 28th, 1986, by the way, he didn't come forward and just release this information to the public. But on January 28th, 1986, 30 years ago, this year, and that's why I'm doing this presentation, the Challenger actually exploded. Okay? Why? Because nobody did anything about it. They just kept on pushing forward. So these are the kind of problems that some hackers may have issue with. What if that vulnerability was still in the systems for the automotive systems, and now somebody can just go ahead and mass shut down vehicles or stop them on a freeway, and all you need is 5, and you'll have so many accidents, it'd be crazy. It'd be cataclysmic. And this is, communication, having cars, horns honk and stuff like this. This has been already done by insiders. It's been proven that they have the capabilities to do this in mass to multiple vehicles at once. But it could be more devastating than the Challenger. Okay? Roger testified and found himself shunned by his colleagues and managers so much that he actually resigned. So here's an ethical talk where Roger actually speaks. I just want to put this up there before it actually goes ahead forward.
Before I start, I want to preface with a remark. I'm going to show you the NASA feed video of the launch that was piped to all the contractors on the program. I have to tell you, it's the first time I actually saw a launch from my facility. I didn't even know it was viewable from my facility. I was about doing the business on the program for my whole career. And this is the only one I actually saw from my plant. But before I show it to you, I want to impress upon you several things. And although this may sound like a crass statement, it's not meant to be so. But the Challenger story and use as a case study to help students understand what's going to be coming up, especially, it's not about the death of 7 astronauts. And I know that sounds horrible, but it's not about that. That was a horrible, horrible culmination of the event itself. 7 exceptional people forfeited their lives for such an irresponsible launch system. It's also not about the loss of over $2 billion worth of hardware. What it's about is professionals in the system who had the authority and responsibility and fiduciary interest to do the right thing. And they abdicated that. They abdicated that because they were pressured to do so by the agency called NASA, as you will hear as the story unfolds.
So the reason why, obviously, I play that is because we can't abdicate our roles, no matter what they are, whether we're inside the organization or whether we're the actual ethical hacker and we're interested in trying to fix something. So that's why we have to learn to work together a lot better than sometimes we do. So what happens when we have that big pileup of vehicles because somebody actually got in and something did happen and it didn't get fixed? Well, corporation does seem to care a lot about money. So that obviously, hopefully, I'm hoping to God it never happens. And I'm a religious guy. So, as far as hackers themselves, one doesn't have to look far to see different types of hackers that are out there. And Henry Ford was one. We have Roger Boisley. Yeah, he was a physical engineer, but he was a hacker. He knew how the systems worked inside out. He knew what was going to happen before it even happened. He predicted the future. The Dodge brothers, Tesla. We have Charlie Miller, Chris Velasquez. We have so many different people around us that actually can inspire and hopefully help to lead us into making the right decisions in the end. And hopefully those right decisions involve ethical decisions and something that we can work together on, because it's about bridging that gap. So, what actions will you take? Can hackers be heroes? I know we can. However, stunt hacking may not be the best way to achieve this, but it often gets a point across. So it's hard to argue against that. Even in my own mind, I have a moral conflict with this because I understand how important this was because you know what? As soon as this started happening, if you follow this wire, we're still talking about it. I'm still up here talking about it at a conference. But when you follow stuff like this, you start to see the chain effects. We actually have vulnerability programs that are getting released out there. Corporations are actually in their infant steps in trying to reach out to us and trying to get some kind of program. Is it going to get better? Absolutely. It actually is going to get better. Okay, they start out small. Okay, if they're not getting the response and they're offering only so much, they're probably going to increase the rewards. Okay, that's the way that Tesla started out. They were small and then they increased the rewards. So if you look historically at what's been happening, we actually can be heroes. So observations we made, we talked about the culture, we talked about stereotypes, differences, we talked about similarities, the culture clashes, various different countermeasures, how we can work together, and it's going to take a lot from both sides. We talked about the history versus today's stuff that happened, and again, vehicle systems, whether it's a CAN bus system in a vehicle or it's an actual rocket booster. I mean, each may have its own cataclysmic effect, and any death is one death too many. So, if you have any questions, Dave Schaefer, D0xt0r, let me know. I'm open up to questions and yes right now. And you can, if you don't, you can clap and we can move on. Thank you. It was nice having you here today. Yeah. So the question is, how do I feel about unlocking vehicles' potentials through automotive cars? And he gave an example of a navigation system. I think that if you could personally, I feel that that's cool. I think that we should investigate, we should explore. However, I know for a fact that corporations don't feel that way for obvious reasons. But yeah. I think that's awesome. It's like going out buying a nest. Why shouldn't you go out buy a nest and go ahead and try to see how to get telnet to it and try to issue different commands to it? Absolutely, do it. Any other questions? Okay. Well, obviously there's no competition, but I got to repeat the question. That's why I got this little magical thing going up. It's basically, how can the corporations compete with the dark web, with ODAs that are being auctioned off for like hundreds of thousands of dollars and stuff like that? Obviously they can't. Okay. They can, but they can't. It's one of those things. It's not a price they're willing to pay. And if the black market's always going to offer, even if they paid $100,000, the black market's always going to offer more. It's the nature of things. So, again, how do they compete? There's, definitely, ethically trying to reach out, to people, making them realize that there is another choice. This is the best way they can compete. Try to combat that. And maybe people, if they offer the right amount of money, maybe $10,000, it's only 10%. Of what, and they're not even offering that in some programs, which is kind of horrible. And I've actually talked to people and they said, well, we're just starting out small. Because again, I have them in contacts. It's not like I'm just coming up here making this stuff up. I actually talk to these people in organizations. We're just starting out small. And, if we don't get a good response, then we'll increase it more than likely, in the future, but they have to start somewhere. And, and if you give somebody $10,000 or $100,000, they may actually go for the 10,000 just because it's the right thing to do, as opposed to, because when that thing hits the black market in O-Day, you never know what foreign government or whoever is going to use that, because that's the people that are going to pay for that stuff, right? Yeah. Could be our own government too, but so we have a history. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.